The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 miles of polished stone and gleaming metal. Representatives from 847 different species filled the massive chamber, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes. Some floated in environmental pods, others stood on multiple legs, and a few existed as pure energy contained within crystalline structures. At the center of this vast assembly, High Chancellor Vex Thara of the Zephyrian Empire raised her 4 arms for silence. Her blue-scaled skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and her large black eyes surveyed the crowd with obvious displeasure. The soft clicking of her claws against the speaking podium echoed through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Fellow members of the council," Vexithara began, her translator converting her native sounds into the common tongue. "We face an unprecedented crisis. A species has dared to expand beyond their assigned boundaries without permission. They have colonized 200 star systems in less than 3 of their centuries. They have ignored every subtle warning we have sent." A ripple of concerned sounds moved through the assembly. The Korthak representative, General Throck, slammed his massive fist against his delegation's platform. His species resembled giant beetles, with thick armor plating covering their entire bodies. "These humans mock our authority," he growled. "They spread like a plague across the galaxy." Ambassador Quailith of the Ethereal Collective, a being of pure thought housed in a floating crystal, pulsed with worried light patterns. "Our computational models show their expansion rate increasing exponentially. At this pace, they will encounter 17 more member species within 50 cycles." The council chamber filled with alarmed chatter in hundreds of different languages. Some species hissed, others buzzed, and a few communicated through color, changes that painted rainbow patterns across their sections of the hall. Vexithara waited for quiet before continuing. "The humans have shown no respect for established galactic order. When we sent the traditional warning beacon to their home system, they responded by asking if we needed technical assistance. When we deployed observation fleets near their colonies, they invited our crews to cultural festivals." General Throck stood again, his massive frame casting shadows across nearby delegations. "My intelligence reports indicate they possess military capabilities beyond their apparent technological level. Their ships move in patterns our strategists cannot predict. They use weapons that disable rather than destroy, which suggests either weakness or dangerous confidence." "The latter, I suspect," added Counselor Nixara, the snake-like representative from the Sindrani Republic. Her scaled coils shifted restlessly as she spoke. "A species that shows mercy to enemies either lacks the will to fight or possesses such overwhelming power that they feel no threat. Given their expansion rate, I believe we face the second scenario." High Chancellor Vexithara's expression grew more severe. "Which brings us to today's emergency session. The humans have established colonies in systems that rightfully belong to member species. They have built space stations at strategic hyperspace junction points. They have even begun offering membership in something they call the Human Colonial Alliance to species we have kept carefully isolated." The chamber erupted again. The insect-like Vorthak clicked their mandibles in distress. The plant-based Sylvani rustled their leaves in what their species considered panic. Even the normally calm Mentari, with their telepathic abilities, projected waves of anxiety that made sensitive species throughout the hall feel uneasy. "Order!" Vexithara commanded. "We must act decisively before this situation deteriorates further. The humans must be brought to heel." Ambassador Zeth of the Aquatic Confederation, speaking through a water-filled translation device, bubbled his disagreement. "Perhaps we should attempt formal diplomatic contact first. Our current approach of indirect warnings may be culturally inappropriate for their species." "Diplomacy requires respect," General Throck countered. "These humans have shown none. They respond to our authority with what their translators call amusement. When we positioned a full battle fleet at the edge of their space, they asked if we were lost and offered navigational assistance. Several delegates made sounds of outrage. The very idea that a young species would treat the Council's military displays as opportunities for helpfulness struck them as either incredible stupidity or dangerous arrogance. Counselor Nixara's tongue flicked out, tasting the air for emotional chemicals. "The question remains, Are they truly ignorant of our power, or do they simply not fear it? Our psychological profiles of other species have always been accurate before. That is exactly the problem, Vexithera replied. Human psychology does not match any known patterns. They respond to threats with curiosity. They treat potential enemies as potential friends. They show kindness to species that could destroy them and amusement toward powers that have humbled entire civilizations. The High Chancellor activated a holographic display showing human colonial worlds. Each planet pulsed with activity markers, showing population growth, industrial development, and defensive installations. Look at their expansion pattern. They do not conquer empty worlds and exploit them. They terraform hostile environments and make them garden worlds. They establish trade relationships with primitive species instead of subjugating them. They share technology freely rather than hoarding it, which makes them even more dangerous, General Throck observed. A conquering species, we understand. A species that spreads by making friends and improving conditions wherever they go will attract support from populations we have kept under control for millennia. The truth of this statement settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. The Galactic Council maintained order through carefully managed fear and dependency. Member species remained stable by knowing their place in the hierarchy. Humanity's approach threatened to upset millions of years of established order. Therefore, High Chancellor Vexithera continued, the Council will issue formal demands to the human government. They will halt all expansion beyond their original solar system immediately. They will surrender 90% of their colonial worlds to appropriate member species. They will submit to Council oversight of their remaining territories. They will provide tribute of resources and technology as compensation for their unauthorized expansion. She paused, letting the weight of these demands settle. They will have 6 of their months to comply fully. If they refuse, the Council will take whatever action becomes necessary to preserve galactic stability. The vote was swift and overwhelming. Only 12 species abstained, mostly younger civilizations that had joined the Council within the last few thousand years. The rest supported the ultimatum with enthusiasm born from thousands of years of successful intimidation. As the session concluded, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the Human Observation Gallery, having listened to the entire proceeding through her translation implant. She was a small woman by human standards, with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. The official invitation to attend as an observer had arrived just 3 days earlier, barely enough time to travel from Earth. When High Chancellor Vexithara's aide approached her with the formal ultimatum document, Sarah accepted it with a polite smile. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice carrying clearly through her personal translator. "This is quite generous of the Council. I'll make sure our leadership receives this right away." The Zephyrian aide, expecting fear or anger, found himself confused by the human's pleasant demeanor. "You understand the seriousness of these demands?" he asked. "Oh, absolutely," Sarah replied, tucking the document into her briefcase with the same care she might show a child's drawing. The Council clearly put a lot of thought into this. 6 months should be plenty of time for our people to review everything properly. As she walked toward the exit, Sarah's smile grew wider. She could hardly wait to share this with President Williams and the Defense Council. The poor aliens had no idea what they had just done. The news of the Galactic Council's ultimatum reached Earth through the quantum communication network, within hours of Ambassador Chen's departure from the Council station. President Williams stood in the Oval Office, reading the formal document while his advisors watched his expression carefully. 6 months to surrender 200 worlds, Williams said slowly, then looked up at his staff. Did they include a return shipping label? Secretary of Defense Martinez tried to maintain her serious expression but failed. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Sir, I think we need to take this seriously." "Oh, I'm taking it seriously, Maria. I'm seriously wondering if they've ever actually met humans before." Williams set the document on his desk and activated the global communication system. "Let's see how our colonies react to the good news." The response from human space was immediate and overwhelming. New Tokyo's governor sent back a message asking if the Council needed help with basic mathematics, since they seemed confused about how territories worked. The miners on Kepler 442b offered to donate some rare metals to help the aliens build better translators. assuming the ultimatum was the result of a communication error. On social media platforms across human space, the demands became instant comedy gold. Someone created a meme showing the Council's seal with the caption, "Galactic Karen wants to speak to Earth's manager." Another popular image showed a child's lemonade stand with a sign reading, "Help pay alien tribute, 5 credits per cup." The late-night comedy shows had a field day. Host Jennifer Park opened her show by reading the ultimatum in increasingly dramatic voices before declaring, "Folks, I haven't seen demands this unreasonable since my ex asked for half my streaming passwords in the divorce." But behind the laughter, humanity's leadership was far from idle. Admiral Torres called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council, bringing together military leaders from across human space. The conference room deep beneath Geneva's surface hummed with quiet efficiency as holographic displays showed fleet, positions, and defensive installations. "Intelligence. Reports suggest the Council has never faced serious resistance," Torres began, her weathered face grim despite the public humor. "Every species in their records either submitted immediately or was crushed within weeks." General Harrison, commanding the Colonial Defense Forces, leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of numbers are we looking at if this goes military?" "Best estimates put their combined fleet strength at roughly 50,000 capital ships, with supporting vessels numbering in the hundreds of thousands," replied Intelligence Director Kumar. "However, most of these ships are designed for intimidation rather than actual combat. They've relied on overwhelming presence rather than tactical superiority." Admiral Torres nodded. "Which works when you're dealing with species that see a big fleet and immediately surrender. It's less effective against opponents who might shoot back." The Defense Council had been preparing for this possibility since humanity's first contact with galactic civilization 15 years earlier. The suspicious absence of any welcoming committee, combined with reports of missing species that had supposedly chosen isolation, had set off alarm bells throughout human intelligence services. Director Kumar activated another display showing human defensive preparations. Project Hedgehog has been active for 8 years. Every colonial world has deep space sensor networks and hidden defensive platforms. Our shipyards have been producing vessels designed for asymmetric warfare rather than traditional fleet actions. The aliens build ships like floating cities, added Fleet Admiral Chen, Ambassador Chen's younger brother. Massive, slow, heavily armored, designed to intimidate. Our vessels are built for speed, stealth, and precision. If they want to fight, they'll get one they're not prepared for. Meanwhile, across human space, colonial administrators were having very different conversations. Governor Patricia Walsh of New Manchester called a public meeting in the planet's central dome to discuss the Council's demands. The town hall was packed with colonists, their faces showing more curiosity than concern. "So they want us to pack up and leave," Walsh said, reading from the ultimatum. "Apparently, this world belongs to something called the Korthak Empire, by right of prior claim." A farmer named Jenkins stood up from the crowd. "Prior claim? We've been terraforming this rock for 30 years. Before we got here, it was nothing but dust and poisonous atmosphere." "That's exactly what I told the Council's messenger," Walsh replied with a grin. "I also invited them to visit and see what we've built. Maybe they could learn something about actual colonization versus just sticking flags in empty space." The crowd chuckled, but an engineer named Rodriguez raised a more serious concern. "Governor, what if they actually try to force us out? My kids were born here. This is their home." Walsh's expression grew firm. "Then they'll learn why humans don't abandon family. The Defense Corps assures me we're not as helpless as we look." Similar scenes played out across human space. On New Wales, the colonists organized a festival to celebrate their impending liberation, complete with comedy performances mocking galactic bureaucracy. The miners of Asteroid Station Alpha sent a message to the Council offering to teach them proper mining techniques, since their demand for tribute suggested they didn't know how to extract resources efficiently. But perhaps the most telling response came from the newest human colony, established just 2 years earlier, on a world the Council claimed belonged to a species called the Vorthak. The human settlers had discovered a crashed Vorthak ship shortly after arrival. Along with evidence of a failed colony attempt from centuries earlier, instead of ignoring the find, the humans had spent months restoring the ship and recovering Vorthak cultural artifacts. They established a memorial site and began trying to contact the Vorthak homeworld to return their ancestors' remains properly. The Council's demand that they surrender the world struck the colonists as particularly ironic. We're the only ones who actually cared about Vorthak. History, said colony leader Dr. Emma Watson in her response to the ultimatum. If the Council wants this world to honor Vorthak heritage, they should let us finish our work instead of trying to steal it. Back on Earth, President Williams addressed the United Earth Assembly 2 weeks after receiving the Council's demands. The packed chamber fell silent as he took the podium, holding the formal ultimatum document. Fellow citizens, Williams began, we have received what can only be described as the most presumptuous piece of mail in human history. A group calling themselves the Galactic Council has informed us that our expansion into space violates their rules. They want us to surrender 90% of our worlds and pay tribute for the privilege of existing. The assembly erupted in laughter and indignant shouts. Williams waited for quiet before continuing. Now I want to be clear about something. We've always known that joining galactic civilization might involve compromises. We're willing to discuss reasonable regulations, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. What we're not willing to discuss is surrendering our children's futures because a bunch of aliens got nervous about competition. The applause was thunderous. Williams raised his hand for silence. I've instructed Ambassador Chen to return to the Council with our response. We thank them for their concern, but we'll continue expanding into empty space and improving worlds that nobody else wanted. If they'd like to discuss actual cooperation instead of demanding submission, our door is always open. As Williams left the podium, he couldn't help but smile at the thought of the Council's reaction. Humanity had spent centuries learning to deal with bullies, tyrants, and self-appointed authorities. Some things never changed, whether the bully was a schoolyard tough or an ancient galactic empire. The real question was whether the Council would be smart enough to recognize what they were really dealing with before they made their situation much worse. High Chancellor Vexithera stared at Ambassador Chen's response with growing disbelief. The human had returned to the Council station exactly 3 weeks after receiving the ultimatum, carrying what appeared to be a formal diplomatic reply. Instead of the expected surrender or desperate plea for mercy, the document contained an invitation. They want us to attend a cultural exchange symposium, Vexithera read aloud to the emergency council session. They suggest that better understanding between our peoples might lead to mutually beneficial arrangements. General Throck's mandibles clicked in agitation. They mock us. 3 weeks to respond to our ultimatum, and they invite us to a party. It gets worse, Vexithera continued. They've included what they call a preliminary response to our demands. They thank us for our interest in galactic governance, but respectfully decline to abandon their colonies. They note that since most of the worlds in question were empty when they arrived, the concept of prior claims might need clarification. The assembled delegates buzzed, hissed, and flashed various patterns of distress. The ethereal collective's representative pulsed with confused light patterns. Our models did not predict this response. Typically, species either submit immediately or declare war. This appears to be neither. Counselor Nixara coiled more tightly on her platform. Intelligence reports from our observation fleets are equally puzzling. Human colonies have not increased defensive postures. Their civilian populations continue normal activities. Some colonies have actually extended invitations for our crews to visit their cultural sites. Sir, interrupted Captain Vex Cole, a junior Zephyrian officer who served as liaison with the observation fleets. Permission to share the reports from Fleet Commander Rathmore? Vexithera gestured approval. The young officer activated a holographic display showing the human colony of New Harmony, a terraformed world in what the Council considered Korthak space. Fleet Commander Rathmore positioned Battle Group 7 at the system's edge as ordered, Captain Vexcole explained. Standard intimidation formation, 300 vessels. The human response was unexpected. The display showed communication logs from the encounter. Instead of panicked surrender messages, the human colonial governor had sent a cheerful greeting, asking if the fleet needed assistance with navigation or supplies. When informed that this was a show of force, the governor had responded by asking if the crew would like to attend the colony's harvest festival next week. The commander attempted to clarify that this was a military demonstration, intended to show the consequences of defying council authority. Captain Vexicle continued, his voice growing smaller. The humans asked if we needed help with our demonstration, and offered to provide a better venue with viewing areas for our crews. General Throck slammed his fist against his platform again. This is intolerable. They treat our battle fleets like tourist attractions. It gets worse, General, the captain replied nervously. When Commander Rathmore finally explained that we were there to force their surrender, the colonists organized a welcoming committee. They sent shuttles with gifts, cultural presentations, and something called coffee and donuts. The chamber fell silent. The concept of treating an invasion force as honored guests was so far outside their experience that many delegates struggled to process the information. Ambassador Quileth pulsed with analytical patterns. Did the fleet commander maintain proper protocol? He tried, Captain Vexicle answered. But when human children started sending drawings of their ships to his crew, discipline became difficult. Several of our junior officers requested permission to send replies. Vexthara's claws scraped against her podium. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. For millions of years, the Council's method had been simple. Show overwhelming force, demand submission, and either receive surrender or crush resistance. They had never encountered a species that responded to military threats with hospitality. What did Commander Rathmore do? She asked. He withdrew to minimum safe distance and requested new orders. His final report noted that several crew members had asked about extending shore leave to visit the colony. The implication hit the chamber like a shockwave. Not only were humans unintimidated by Council military might, they were actually corrupting Council personnel through simple friendliness. Director Zeph High of Council Intelligence stood to address the assembly. His species, the observers, existed as shifting energy patterns within containment suits, making their emotions difficult to read. We have additional concerning reports from other observation fleets. Humans appear to treat all our military demonstrations as opportunities for cultural exchange. A holographic map showed human space with Council fleet positions marked in red. Fleet Group 12 reported that human colonists on New Aberdeen offered to trade locally grown food for samples of our military rations, claiming interest in expanding their recipe collections. Fleet Group 19 was invited to participate in something called a sporting event on New Kenya. And most disturbing, Director Zephi continued, Fleet Group 3 reported that the human colony on New Shanghai has established what they call a Galactic Friendship Center, specifically to welcome our crews. They have prepared cultural exhibitions, translation services, and recreational facilities. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. This was completely outside the Council's experience. Species were supposed to fear their fleets, not try to make friends with them. Councillor Nixara raised a disturbing possibility. What if this is a sophisticated psychological warfare technique? Perhaps humans are attempting to corrupt our military personnel and gather intelligence through false friendship. Our xenopsychology experts have considered that theory, Director Zeph High replied. However, analysis of human behavior patterns suggests their responses are genuine. They appear to actually view our presence as an opportunity for positive contact between civilizations. General Throck stood again, his massive frame radiating frustration. Then they are either incredibly naive or incredibly confident. Either way, they must be taught proper respect for Council authority. High Chancellor Vexithera made a decision that would change the course of galactic history.
Very well.
If they will not respond to shows of force, we will demonstrate actual force. General Throck, select a target world for limited military action, something small enough to make our point without causing excessive casualties. I recommend the agricultural world of New Manitoba, General Throck replied immediately. Small population, limited strategic value, but important enough to send a message. A quick conquest should shock them into compliance. Approved. But remember, we want to demonstrate power, not commit genocide. Use sufficient force to secure surrender, then treat the population according to standard occupation protocols. As the council session concluded, none of the delegates noticed Ambassador Chen sitting quietly in the observer section, taking notes on her personal device. She had requested permission to attend as part of ongoing diplomatic communication, and the council had agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to intimidate her further. Sarah Chen made careful notes about fleet positions, military planning, and council psychology, but what concerned her most was their complete misunderstanding of human nature. They saw kindness as weakness, friendship as manipulation, and hospitality as naivety. When she returned to her quarters, Chen immediately sent an encrypted message through the quantum communication network. The message was brief: "They're going to test us. Prepare for visitors on New Manitoba." 3 days later, as General Throck's task force prepared to depart for human space, Council observation posts reported another puzzling development. Human colonial worlds had begun organizing what they called alien appreciation festivals, complete with educational programs about galactic civilization and cultural exchange workshops. The humans weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for friendship. And somehow that was the most terrifying response the Council could have imagined. Back on New Manitoba, Governor Thompson received the warning from Earth and called his defense coordinator. "How long do we need for civilian evacuation?" 48 hours for complete evacuation to the underground shelters, sir. 72 hours if we want to move everyone off-world. Thompson nodded. "Start the evacuation protocols, but keep it quiet. And make sure the welcome center is fully stocked. If these aliens want to visit New Manitoba, we're going to show them proper human hospitality." The coordinator looked confused. "Sir, they're coming to attack us, not make friends." Thompson smiled. "Son, you'd be surprised how often those two things turn out to be the same thing. Besides, someone should teach these council folks how civilized beings actually behave." The Korthak task force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Manitoba system in perfect formation. General Throck's flagship, the Dominance Eternal, led a fleet of 37 warships designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Each vessel stretched over a kilometer in length, bristling with weapons that had reduced rebellious worlds to glass across the galaxy. "Status report," General Throck commanded from his bridge, his beetle-like form settling into the command throne designed for his species' anatomy. "All ships in position." "General," replied his aide, Colonel Vexnen, "the human colony shows normal activity patterns. No signs of military preparation or panic." General Throck studied the tactical display showing New Manitoba. The agricultural world glowed softly in the system's yellow star, its terraformed surface dotted with farming communities and small cities. It looked peaceful, productive, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Open a communication channel to the colony," Throck ordered. "It is time to demonstrate the consequences of defying council authority." On New Manitoba's surface, Governor Thompson sat in his office overlooking the planet's capital city of Prairie Home. The evacuation had proceeded smoothly, with most civilians now safely in underground shelters or aboard transport ships at the system's outer edge. Only essential personnel remained on the surface, along with volunteers who had insisted on staying to greet the visitors properly. "Incoming transmission from the alien fleet," reported communications officer. Martinez Thompson straightened his tie and activated the viewer. General Throck's intimidating form filled the screen, his massive mandibles clicking as he spoke through the translation system. "Human colonists of this world," Throck began, his voice carrying the weight of authority backed by overwhelming firepower, "you have illegally occupied territory belonging to the Korthak Empire. By order of the Galactic Council, you will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation. Resistance will be met with swift and decisive force." Thompson listened politely, then smiled warmly at the screen. "General Throck, I presume? Welcome to New Manitoba. We've been expecting you." The response clearly wasn't what Throck had anticipated. His mandibles clicked uncertainly before he continued. "You misunderstand, human. This is not a social visit. This is a military conquest. Prepare for planetary occupation." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Thompson replied, his tone remaining friendly. "You're here to show us what happens when we don't follow council rules. That's fine. We've prepared a proper reception for you and your crews. The Welcome Center has cultural exhibits about our colony, local cuisine, and comfortable accommodations." Colonel Vexenen looked confused. "Sir, they are inviting us to visit their planet." "I heard them, Colonel," Throck replied grimly. "They think this is some kind of diplomatic mission. They will learn otherwise. Begin the assault." The Korthak fleet moved into attack formation, their massive vessels preparing to demonstrate the overwhelming force that had cowed hundreds of worlds. Weapon systems powered up, sending energy readings spiking across every sensor in the system. Then something extraordinary happened. Space around the Korthak fleet suddenly filled with new contacts. Ships appeared from nowhere, materializing out of what seemed like empty space. But these weren't the massive dreadnoughts the Council expected from a military civilization. They were smaller, sleeker vessels that moved like dancers around the ponderous Korthak warships. "Contact!" Colonel Vexenin shouted. Unknown vessels, multiple signatures surrounding the fleet. General Throck studied the tactical display in growing confusion. The human ships were tiny compared to his warships, barely larger than Korthak fighters. There were dozens of them weaving between his vessels in patterns that made no tactical sense. "Sir, they're not attacking," reported his weapons officer. "They're just flying around us." "Incoming transmission from the lead human vessel," communications announced. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Corps," came a calm voice over the communication system. "General Throck, we understand you're here to demonstrate Council military capabilities. We're here to demonstrate ours. Please note that your weapons are now offline." Throck's bridge erupted in alarm as his crew discovered that their weapon systems had indeed been disabled. Every gun, missile launcher, and energy cannon on every ship in the fleet had been neutralized without any apparent attack. "How is this possible?" Throck demanded. "New technology," Admiral Chen replied pleasantly. "We developed it specifically for situations like this. Don't worry. Your life support and navigation systems are completely untouched. We're not barbarians." The next few minutes were perhaps the most confusing in Korthak military history. The human ships continued their graceful dance around the disabled fleet, occasionally drifting close enough that Throck could see their crews through transparent sections. The humans appeared to be waving at them. "Sir," Colonel Vexenin reported nervously, "they're broadcasting something called classical music on all frequencies. Our crew is asking permission to listen." General Throck was beginning to understand that this situation had moved far beyond his experience or training. "What are your intentions?" he asked the human admiral. "Well, originally we were just going to disable your fleet and send you home with a polite message about respecting our sovereignty," Admiral Chen replied. "But Governor Thompson has convinced us to try something different. Would you and your crew like to visit New Manitoba as our guests?" "Guests?" "Proper guests. We'd like to show you what we've built here, introduce you to our people, and maybe help you understand why we're not interested in surrendering our homes. Plus, our medical staff would like to check on anyone who might have been injured when your weapons powered down." Throck looked around his bridge at his crew. The Korthak were a warrior species, bred for conquest and intimidation. But they had never encountered opponents who disabled their entire fleet without firing a shot, then offered medical assistance and cultural exchange. "This is not how conquest works," Throck said finally. "No," Admiral Chen agreed. "This is how civilization works. The offer stands, General. Your ships are perfectly safe, your crews are unharmed, and New Manitoba's hospitality is legendary. Or you can return to the Council and report that humanity is more dangerous than they imagined." While General Throck wrestled with his impossible situation, events were moving rapidly on New Manitoba's surface. The few remaining colonists had emerged from their shelters and were preparing for visitors. The Welcome Center, originally built to process new colonists, had been hastily converted into a cultural exhibition space. Dr. Emily Watson, the colony's chief medical officer, supervised the preparation of medical facilities. "Remember, we don't know their anatomy or dietary requirements," she told her staff. "Standard first aid protocols until we learn more. And keep the translation software running." Meanwhile, in the colony's main kitchen, Chef Rodriguez and his team worked frantically to prepare food that might be suitable for alien digestive systems. "Start with simple proteins and carbohydrates," he instructed. "Nothing too spiced or processed. And prepare those fruit juices the kids suggested." The colony's children, despite the evacuation orders, had somehow convinced several parents to let them stay to meet the space visitors. They had prepared drawings, simple gifts, and what they considered appropriate welcome presents for alien guests. Back in space, General Throck faced a decision that would define the rest of his military career. His fleet was disabled but unharmed. His crew was confused but curious, and the humans were waiting patiently for his response while playing what they called relaxing music over the communication channels. "Admiral Chen," Throck said finally, "if we accept your invitation, what guarantees do we have for our safety?" "General, you came here to conquer our world and harm our people," Admiral Chen replied gently. "We disabled your entire fleet without injuring a single member of your crew. If we wanted to hurt you, would we be having this conversation? The logic was undeniable even to a career military officer trained in suspicion. More importantly, Throck was beginning to realize that returning to the Council with news of total defeat would be far worse than returning with intelligence about human capabilities and intentions. "Very well," he said. "A small contingent of my officers will accept your invitation. But this changes nothing about the Council's demands." "Of course not," Admiral Chen agreed. "But it might change your understanding of who you're making demands of. We'll have shuttles ready to transport your delegation within the hour." As General Throck prepared to become possibly the first Korthak officer in history to be defeated and then invited to dinner, he couldn't help but wonder if the Council had any idea what they were really dealing with. These humans had turned his military demonstration into a cultural exchange, his conquest into a diplomatic mission, and his career into something completely unprecedented. The most disturbing part was that he was actually curious to see what they had built on their little agricultural world. 3 days later, General Throck sat in the New Manitoba Welcome Center, holding a steaming cup of something the humans called coffee, while watching a presentation about sustainable agriculture. His mandibles moved in what his species considered deep thought, a response that was becoming disturbingly frequent since his arrival on the human world. The delegation of Korthak officers around him showed similar signs of confusion. Colonel Vexnen was examining a holographic display showing crop rotation techniques, while Major Kethra was engaged in animated conversation with a human child who was explaining why they had chosen to give him a drawing of his ship. "The soil restoration process takes about 7 years," Dr. Martinez was explaining to the alien visitors. "When we arrived, this world had a toxic atmosphere and dead ground. Now look outside." Through the center's large windows, rolling fields of grain stretched to the horizon, under New Manitoba's golden afternoon sky. Korthak officers who had come to conquer a rebellious colony found themselves learning about terraforming, sustainable development, and something the humans called environmental stewardship. "Your people did this in 30 years? General Throck asked, his translator converting his clicks and buzzes into understandable speech. "The basic terraforming took about 15 years, Governor Thompson replied from his chair across from the general. "The rest has been refinement and expansion. We're particularly proud of our reforestation project in the southern continent." What disturbed Throck most was not the humans' obvious capability, but their complete lack of fear or hostility. Even after he had arrived with a battle fleet to conquer their world, they treated him and his officers like honored guests. The colony's medical staff had insisted on health checkups for the entire delegation. Their engineers had offered technical exchanges, and their children kept presenting them with gifts and drawings. "General," interrupted Communications Officer Martinez, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Council station." The conversation in the Welcome Center quieted as the main display activated, showing High Chancellor Vexithera's imposing form. Her expression showed barely controlled rage as she took in the scene of Korthak officers sharing refreshments with human colonists. "General Throck," she began, her voice sharp with authority, "explain your current situation immediately." Throck set down his coffee cup and straightened in his chair. "High Chancellor, I am conducting reconnaissance of human capabilities as ordered." "Reconnaissance?" Vexthara's claws scraped audibly against her podium. "Our intelligence reports indicate your entire task force has been neutralized, and you are currently attending what humans call a cultural festival." "The situation developed beyond initial parameters," Throck replied carefully. "Human military capabilities exceed our estimates. Their defensive systems disabled our entire fleet without causing casualties. I determined that intelligence gathering would serve Council interests better than a failed assault." The Chancellor's expression grew more severe. "Are you or your forces under duress?" Throck looked around the Welcome Center at his officers who were examining human art displays, sampling local cuisine, and engaged in friendly conversations with colonists. Several children had gathered around Major Kethra, who was attempting to explain Korthak military decorations to an audience that seemed more interested in the pretty colors than their significance. "No, High Chancellor, we are guests." The simple statement seemed to break something in Vexithara's composure. "Guests? You were sent to demonstrate Council authority through military conquest. Instead, you are attending social events with the enemy." Governor Thompson stood up and moved toward the display. "Excuse me, Chancellor Vexthara, but I think there's been a misunderstanding." General Throck and his officers aren't our enemies. They're our guests, and frankly, they're welcome to stay as long as they like. The Zephyrian leader's black eyes fixed on the human governor with undisguised hostility. You dare address the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council directly? Well, yes, Thompson replied with mild confusion. You're in my home talking to my guests. Basic courtesy suggests I should introduce myself. I'm Governor Thompson, and this is New Manitoba. We're pleased to meet you. The casual dismissal of Galactic protocol sent ripples of shock through the council chamber, where other delegates were watching the exchange. For millions of years, addressing the High Chancellor directly without permission had been an act reserved for member species' highest representatives. Furthermore, Thompson continued, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to visit as well. We're having a harvest festival next week, and I think you'd find our agricultural techniques interesting. Vexithara's composure finally cracked completely. You invite the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council to a farming celebration? Why not? Food production is the foundation of any civilization. Plus, our local musicians have been working on pieces inspired by different galactic species. I think there's even a composition dedicated to Zephyrian culture. In the council chamber, Ambassador Chen watched the exchange with barely concealed delight. The aliens were discovering what every human diplomat had learned. You couldn't intimidate people who genuinely didn't understand why they should be afraid. High Chancellor, Vexithara made one final attempt to salvage the situation. General Throck, you will return to council space immediately and report for disciplinary action. These humans will surrender their colonies as demanded, or face the full military might of the council. General Throck stood slowly, his massive frame imposing even in the friendly atmosphere of the Welcome Center. But when he spoke, his words carried a weight that surprised everyone present. High Chancellor, with respect, I believe the Council should reconsider its approach to humanity. These people have built something remarkable here. They have turned a dead world into a garden, established a thriving civilization, and responded to our military threat with hospitality and friendship. They are not enemies to be conquered. They are potential allies we should be proud to know. The silence that followed this statement was profound. A career military officer of the Korthak Empire, a species bred for conquest and intimidation, had just recommended friendship with a species the Council considered rebellious upstarts. Furthermore, Throck continued, their military capabilities are far beyond our initial assessments. They disabled our entire task force without firing a weapon or causing injuries. If they had chosen to respond with violence instead of invitation, this conversation would not be taking place. Ambassador Chen chose this moment to stand and address the display. High Chancellor, President Williams has asked me to extend humanity's formal response to the Council's ultimatum. We respectfully decline to surrender our colonies, abandon our expansion, or pay tribute. However, we remain open to discussions about genuine cooperation, mutual defense agreements, and cultural exchange programs. She paused, letting the rejection settle before adding, we also note that several member species have privately contacted us about establishing direct diplomatic relations, independent of Council oversight. They seem interested in what we call friendship, rather than what you call hierarchy. This final revelation hit the Council like a shockwave. The possibility that member species might prefer human-style cooperation to Council domination threatened the very foundation of their authority. Vexithara's final words were spoken with the dignity of a leader, watching her empire crumble. This conversation is not over. The transmission ended, leaving the Welcome Center in thoughtful silence. Finally, Governor Thompson turned to General Throck with a concerned expression. General, I hope our response doesn't cause problems for you personally. You're welcome to stay on New Manitoba as long as you like, but we understand if you need to return to your duties. Throck considered the offer seriously. The idea of remaining on this peaceful world, learning about sustainable agriculture and human culture, was surprisingly appealing. But duty called, even if that duty now included carrying a message the Council didn't want to hear. I will return and make my report, he decided, but I will recommend that the Council open formal diplomatic relations with humanity. You have shown us something we had forgotten existed. What's that? Asked Dr. Martinez. Hope, the general replied simply. You have shown us that civilizations can grow through cooperation instead of conquest, that strength can be used to protect rather than dominate, and that making friends is more powerful than making enemies. As the Korthak delegation prepared to depart, the children of New Manitoba presented each officer with farewell gifts. General Throck found himself holding a small potted plant native to the colony, along with care instructions written in a child's careful handwriting. "It's so you can remember us," explained 8-year-old Sarah Kim, who had appointed herself as the aliens' unofficial cultural guide. "And maybe you can plant it on your world and think about friendship." Standing in his shuttle, looking back at the waving crowd of humans who had turned his military conquest into the most educational 3 days of his life, General Throck realized that the Galactic Council's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human military might. They had underestimated human heart. As his task force prepared to depart New Manitoba, reports were already coming in from across the galaxy.